Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tiffany-Ann Taylor. I'm Vice President for Transportation at the Regional Plan Association. I'm coming from Chile, New York. So thank you for joining us for this panel. It's going to be an interesting conversation about transit-oriented development, or TODs. And to get us started, I'm going to introduce my fellow panelists. So we're going to start with Aileen Bouclé, who is the Executive Director for Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization, followed by Patrick Goddard, President, Brightline Trains. Next, we have Jeremy Mullings, Director for South Florida Commuter Services. And of course, last but definitely not least, James Cromar, Deputy Executive Director of Mobility with the Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization. Okay. So, thanks again. We're going to have a very interesting conversation today, and we want to talk about all the exciting things ranging from environmental sustainability, jurisdictional collaboration, equitable investment, communications, and so forth. So let's get started with the first question. And Aileen, I am going to turn it to you about jurisdictional collaboration. So successful regional development often requires multi-jurisdictional collaboration of entities that may have conflicting priorities. While balancing goals to support successful partnerships, how does your work support governments in promoting connection to transit-oriented developments, intercity transportation, and micromobility?
Thank you, Tiffany. It's a pleasure to be here. That's a great question. The Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization is part of a larger region known as the Miami Urbanized Area. My partner, Broward Mpo, is here, James, myself, and also Palm Beach Mpo. We have entered voluntarily into a memorandum of understanding to create what's known as the Southeast Florida Transportation Council. We are actually a national model of regional collaboration, and we're now nationally recognized and frequently join as a region on panels to discuss how we collaborate regionally on these issues. But in particular, in Miami-Dade County, with the TPO is very focused on that next shift from transit-oriented development to transit-oriented communities. And we're very, very focused on our land use visioning documents, our grant applications, and our transit corridor analysis to make sure that we're hyper-focused on micromobility, first, last mile connectivity, bicycle pedestrian improvements, special needs, parks access, and other amenities such as trails. So a lot of that goes into the regional transportation plan, the update of the regional model, SERPM 9, in which Miami-Dade County is leading on behalf of the region. It's a role that we rotate amongst the region. Broward is just rotating that responsibility over to Miami-Dade County, and the key to our success is collaboration and rotation of those responsibilities at a regional level.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
Is there a trick to, oh, there it goes. Yeah, I want to add also, I appreciate Aileen talking about the partnership at the regional level. And at the government, it's been very important in Broward more recently that the membership of our board is 80% our local governments working at the city level. So it's important for us that we work and communicate with our local partners, that they be sponsors for projects and that they be the ones that are supportive of the work that we are doing. And I believe it's the same in Miami-Dade and Palm Beach, our other partners. But I also want to mention, since we have Patrick here from Brightline, that our partnerships with the private business community are very important also too, that we could not do this alone just with government. We have to work at different levels, federal, state, county, local, goes down to the neighborhoods, but the private side kicking in is also helping our success. And what Jeremy does also is kind of a bridge with the public and private groups.
And on that segue, I'll say thanks, James. So the program we represent, South Florida Commuter Services, is actually a program of the Florida Department of Transportation. And historically, DOT has gotten a bad rap for prioritizing roadways and not doing enough for multimodalism. I don't know if that's true or not. I can tell you the program that I work for is centered on multimodalism. We exist specifically to get people out of single occupant vehicles, more so for regional trips. And I think it was very thoughtful on the DOT side to create this program, which is a regional program representing DOT District 4 and DOT District 6. District 6 is pretty much Miami-Dade County, but we know when people are driving, no one is driving and saying, oh my goodness, I'm going into a different municipality, I hope the rules aren't different here. And travel markets don't work that way, so it was very thoughtful of DOT to create this program that's encouraging regional multimodalism and merging the two districts into one to address it.
Yeah, I'll just add a short point. So we think about transportation as an ecosystem, and whereas historically everybody focused on their own individual project, so I'm trying to get, my community connected, we need to look at it holistically, and we need to think about what are the actual ridership needs of the community, because they're varied and there is a different solution to every problem depending on whether there are commuter services needed or transportation to essential services like education and medical services, our intercity travel, our short haul travel. So I think coming together and looking at the transportation needs holistically and thinking about what is the ecosystem necessary to support that is an approach that takes all of the prejudice out of the decision making and the funding process. It allows you to rationally prioritize projects in accordance with the actual community needs.
Great, thank you. So Patrick, I'm gonna throw this one to you about environmental sustainability and resilience. So climate change is undeniable as we have seen more frequent and intense weather events around the country. By reducing the need for vehicle trips and planning development around public transportation, TODs can support local environmental sustainability and climate resilience goals. As municipalities reinvest in aging infrastructure and think creatively about future needs, how are your organizations prioritizing this challenge in these regional projects?
So we live in Florida, which is very much a car-centric culture. And we've been in existence since 2018, running trains since 2018. We operated for 14 months, we shut down for 19 months, we reopened in November. We're now running about 30% higher than pre-COVID levels. And we've spent the last 4 or 5 years prying people's white-knuckled fists off their steering wheels on I-95. It has not been an easy thing to do. It takes some time and effort to convince people. Where I think you have to start, if people have heard the environmental message and it doesn't necessarily resonate with them because other than those who are very passionate about that cause, to a lot of people, 75% of the people, 75% of the time, it doesn't come up on their radar. It's not something they think about daily. So you have to approach it in practical terms and meet people where they're at. And the way that we are approaching that is we're trying to provide people with a car-optional lifestyle. We're not ready to say a car-free lifestyle yet in Florida, but we can definitely say a car-optional lifestyle where you have the option to reach into your pocket and grab your car keys, or you can, have a multimodal trip. And we're very focused on removing friction from that multimodal trip, so it's as easy to book a multimodal trip as it is to reach into your car keys and get into your car. So the friction on the multimodal trip is on the front end. The friction on the car trip is on the back end when you get stuck in traffic and can't find parking. So we're trying to change people's mindsets by providing them with pragmatic solutions that actually meet them where they are, as opposed to beating them over the head with the ESG message, which resonates with some but doesn't resonate with many. Obviously, as a train company, by nature, by definition, we are going to take millions of cars off the road and save hundreds of thousands of cubic tons of CO2. that's what we're going to do. And as we extend our mobility services and offer these multimodal solutions, we want, our own Brightline Plus service, which is powered by our app and supported by a fleet of vehicles, is going to be completely electric by the end of this year. So we're doing what we can, what's within our realm of control, but I think we all collectively need to come together and promote this idea of a car-optional lifestyle and make it easy for people to actually live that life.
So I'm going to take a bigger picture perspective. I really appreciate what what Patrick mentioned. With Aileen and I, we work with government agencies, and our charge is to look into the future. We make plans every 5 years. We update them every 5 years to do a metropolitan transportation plan or a long-range transportation plan. So we have to look at the future. What are going to be the needs in 25 years? We're currently starting on a 2050 plan that will be ready in a few years. So we're planning ahead for the future. And dealing with resiliency, what we have found is that we are making efforts to say, what are going to be our needs in terms of sea level rise, storm surge, extreme weather in the next 25 years, and plan ahead to make investments. But we're also aware that emergencies come up. We had one about 10 years ago where part of A1A in Fort Lauderdale got washed out. So we had to work with our partners at FDOT, I think Jeremy was there then, and do emergency repairs, and we were able to combine the emergency repairs with a context-sensitive design that incorporated more complete streets features that made it possible for people to walk and drive safely along that corridor. It made it possible for the traffic to move more slowly. There are fewer speeding tickets because people are speeding less. And so I mention that because some of the work that we do in terms of investment for transit, we don't run the transit organization, but we provide support for that. And a lot of what we do in Broward is providing better connections of bicycle facilities or sidewalks or safe places for people to wait for transit that makes it easier for people to ride that transit, make it more inviting. We have, in terms of priorities, a new scoring system for people that apply for funding to make these investments in support of transit. They get extra points if they are doing resiliency features. We recognize that we don't want to make long-term investments in areas that are going to be washed away or flooded out. So we're kind of considering resiliency as features of that sort. But we recognize, again, as I mentioned earlier, that it's a partnership. We all have to play a part and do our improvements that we can.
And I will just say briefly, so the conversation that preceded this spoke a little about choice ridership. And we are in that space where we want to get people who drive single occupant vehicles to try some of these other ride-sharing modes. And by ride-share, I'm also including mass transit. But we're not necessarily here to vilify someone for driving or for owning a car. I'm not going to tell you you're a bad person or you're an evil person. You know, sometimes my colleagues don't agree with me because I'm not going to hesitate to point the finger back at ourselves. Choice ridership, we're in the consumer market. And that's just what it is. We need to put a better product out. If product we're putting out is not going to get people to consume that product, we need to put a better product out there. Bottom line. And we're not going to, if someone even says I'm riding the bus because it's more convenient or it's better for parking, we actually have people in our space who are going to say, what's the matter? You don't care about the environment? You only care about your own convenience? I don't care. We do know that if you get out of your car, it is good for the environment. So let's get this person out of their car the best we can and not try to vilify people for lifestyle choices.
So I think these were all great responses, and you can see a wide range of efforts and policies going on in the region. I think from the perspective of Miami-Dade County, we recently released a joint statement of understanding between Miami-Dade County and Miami-Dade Transportation Planning Organization to spell out specific goals and objectives and our commitment to building a resilient transportation system. Quite frankly, not just in Miami-Dade County, but on behalf of the region. So our commitment to that includes highly targeted goals and objectives, such as finding ways to further integrate our systems, public, private, flexibility in our transportation network, and also looking at programs from Federal Highway Administration that they've set up amazing opportunities for us to implement pilot projects that further advance our programs, such as Miami-Dade 305, resiliency. And this is directly plugged into the long-range transportation plan. So we have a chapter dedicated to this, and these are the type of metrics that we're going to use as we start looking at future programming and prioritization of projects in the region.
Great. Thank you all. I really hope that the audience is taking away the diversity in the responses to that question, understanding that piloting and trying new technology and new grant opportunities, new programs is really important. And I think the points made about incentivizing municipalities and also not vilifying riders is actually really, really important. I think especially as an urban planner, sometimes you can get carried away in a room of other urban planners. And so you need to remember that that might not actually be your core audience. So I really appreciate the feedback on that. So I want to talk a little bit about equitable investment, which is related to that. And actually, James, I'm going to start with you first on this one. So as urban planners and transportation professionals, we know that transportation investments can unintentionally introduce gentrification to historically underserved neighborhoods. TODs are no exception. As your organization promotes regional transportation and community development, what steps are you taking to ensure that investment is equitable in these projects? And what type of entities have emerged as key stakeholders for part of this work?
So those of you that don't live in South Florida, let me give you a little primer that South Florida is not like the rest of the United States. And so these questions, when we need to look at equity measures in terms of minority populations and disadvantaged populations and such, I love being here that you look out and you see people and you have no idea what language they're going to speak or their income levels or anything of that sort. There's such a diversity here. So as we look at equity in Broward, and I believe our other partners will do this too, there are certain requirements that we need to look at as a federal agency in terms of what the government requires. But then we also take it a deeper level so that we're telling a story that can respond to the needs of our communities. We had a community meeting recently, and we looked at the demographics for the area, and it's a high minority population. But the whole surrounding area was high minority. So what does that mean? We did a deeper dive and we looked at, there's limited English proficiency, so we may need to have a Spanish translator available and a Creole translator available. We have other communities that they tick off the equity measures because they have a high number of school-age children, or they might have a lot of seniors. We have a lot of seniors here in Florida, if anybody didn't know that. So there's different responses for different communities based on the demographics of those communities. So that has been very important for us in Broward, is doing a deeper dive into what the equity measures are so that we know that we're responding to what the particular needs are for that community. I want to go back a little bit to the question also with resiliency, that as a transportation agency, it'd be very easy for us just to focus on, here's a facility, we need to make it work for resiliency. We've learned from our partners across the country that we need to be a bit more holistic in our approach. So, for example, there's a community in Hollywood, Florida, that is facing some flooding issues. It's not just a question of going in and fixing Hollywood Boulevard, but it's looking at the surrounding community. What about the residents that are there? There are some that are homeowners, but some are apartment dwellers. What's the income levels? If there are issues here, does it impact them that they have to move out somewhere else? How does it affect the businesses? What are the environmental concerns? So being a bit more holistic in terms of all the projects and using that equity filter to help us be better. In terms of particular champions that have come out, again, we found that the diversity of Broward, it kind of depends on each community in terms of who's coming out and speaking. And so there's some activity that's going on in downtown Fort Lauderdale, which is the employment and the highest density residential area for Broward. And we worked on a mobility hub in the downtown area. And part of the way I viewed that is, if we can make transit very attractive and make it work in downtown Fort Lauderdale, that is going to serve those lower income communities that are nearby. If we can make it more convenient for them to have good transit access that then connects them to educational opportunities, employment opportunities, things of that sort, that can only benefit that community more. So it's not just a question of maybe gentrification, but it's a big picture perspective of how is transit serving to connect the variety of members of the community to the different needs that they have.
So if I can just add on to James's response, which was phenomenal. We represent metropolitan planning organizations. We're largely a policy board where we oversee the programming and prioritization of projects, not just in our county, but as a region. But what are we specifically doing about equity? Because it's not just listening to the words and hearing about our policies, but follow the money trail. Where is the money being invested? Where is it being programmed? And in Miami-Dade County, as I mentioned earlier, we have taken on a leadership role to partner with our county entities to shift from transit-oriented development to transit-oriented communities. Because as James was saying, our diversity and our demographics are a part of our everyday life here, and we're now dealing with that next level of diversity of land use and the diversity within the community's needs. We are focused on urban and non-urban core needs. Sometimes your first last mile connection looks very different in an urban core than it does in a non-urban core area. And how are we addressing that? Not just bicycle pedestrian, but diversity of land use, the needs for trails, for open access to parks, safe routes to parks. So we're investing and prioritizing those type of projects, and also not just from a policy perspective, but again, follow the money trail. The Miami-Dade County Transportation Planning Organization has prioritized #1 in our plans, the north and south corridor of the Miami-Dade County Smart Plan. The north and south corridor represent the northern and southern fringes of our community, where we have the largest struggle in terms of income equality, underrepresented population and diversity, and historically underinvested communities. And by unanimous adoption of our board, that is the #1 priority, is to invest and develop our transit plan in those 2 corridors first. So we have policies backed up with direct funding and action and construction and projects in place to address these issues.
That's great. Jeremy or Patrick?
I'll give an example. So a gentleman sitting back there, Noah, member of my staff. So we were working on a project with Tri-Rail for all of the out-of-towners. Tri-Rail is a regional commuter rail. It's thought that the riders are typically choice riders who ride Tri-Rail, and they're traveling long commutes. So we're working on a last mile demand response program with them that we're going to be helping them pilot around Golden Glades. And we're looking at so my program, we target choice riders specifically. And we're looking at the locations, we're drawing the geofence target area for this service that's supposed to be served by Uber. And we saw this line of retail establishments. And we look at your typical retail worker who doesn't own a car, they're not going to travel long distances to get to work. So the conversation was, we're going to assume that these are not choice riders. Should they be in the geofence target area? Now, if they are included, that is going to hinder service or not allow us to offer the optimal service that we would be able to offer in other parts in terms of response time and the type of cost we can allocate per trip. But if we don't include them, are we doing that community justice from an equity standpoint? So, we had a lot of back and forth internally. We spoke to the folks at Tri-Rail about it, and based on the equity conversation, and we are in the pilot phase, so we're still hoping to learn from it, pretty much learning by doing. We're going to go ahead and include it, because even though they're probably not going to be choice riders, it does create an opportunity to get to these employment centers for folks who live far away and typically would not be targeted to work there. So, that's just an example. The equity conversation could go in a number of directions, but at the same time, to do so, we are going to have to make some sacrifices regarding the choice riders who we exist to target. I'm not sure what my point was there, but there you go. I hope it helped.
Sure. So, Jeremy, I'm actually going to turn this question to you. I want to talk about post-COVID commuting patterns and TODs. So TODs offer an attractive option for residents who desire walkable neighborhoods that are connected to services and amenities while still offering easy access to city centers. TODs can also encourage commuting to work via public transportation. Yet, the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted traditional travel patterns for both leisure and work trips. How has the pandemic impacted your organization's advocacy for future TOD developments? Jeremy.
Well, we don't do a lot with development, so I'm not going to have a lot to say. But I can tell you generally from just an observational standpoint and the habits of the people who we work with in the public, we are responsible for registering low-emission vehicles and carpoolers who use the 95 express lanes. They get to use express lanes for free if you carpool or you drive a low-emissions vehicle, but you have to register with us. And I can tell you that at the height of the pandemic, across the board, we saw massive reductions in vehicle miles traveled. Transit took a huge hit, but we also saw a huge decline in the activity in terms of people registering. So people weren't even, every day we get hundreds of people renewing their registrations. The registrations are for a year. So people weren't even registering to say, okay, when I start driving again, I will be okay. I mean, activity across the board had completely shut down. We're definitely seeing a reverse in that now. We're working with Miami-Dade Transit. We're working with Broward County Transit to get people back on the express buses, who are your choice riders. I think fixed route transit, who are going to be your transit captives, they are seeing not all the way there yet, but better increases in ridership compared to pre-COVID.
Do you want to go?
No, go for it.
Okay. Well, I was going to see if Aileen wanted to say anything.
Oh, sure. So we partnered in the region to conduct a COVID transportation modeling effort and kind of came up with some pilot and some other projects from that data. But we wanted to work to understand the travel behavior patterns as a result of COVID, post, during, during and post-COVID, if you can even qualify us as post-COVID yet. So if you want to take that data and relate it specifically to TODs or TOCs, I would say that we found a need, an increased demand for bicycle, pedestrian, micromobility needs that we would want to see developed in transit-oriented communities. But also, there's a whole other group called the telecommuting group that we discovered from our transportation model, and as a result, we are formally introducing the telecommute work group as part of our official long-range transportation model. So the land uses associated with a telecommuting group are going to be different than what they look like pre-COVID. Joint centers of productivity centers that facilitate telecommuters in mobility hubs that are county-wide and not just in a central district location. Those are the kind of things we're looking at and making sure that those type of land uses and micromobility options are developed within the transit-oriented communities.
Yeah, we can see, so at Miami Central, which is where our Brightline station is in downtown Miami, we developed about 1.5 million square feet of real estate. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Brightline Miami Central station, we have about 800 or so residences. We developed about 300,000 square feet of office space and 130,000 feet or so of retail on the western edge of downtown. And really that area was sort of, we were a little nervous when COVID occurred. We didn't know what was going to happen. We had just started leasing our apartments. We actually leased it up in twice the time that we thought we would. Thankfully, a lot of people decided they wanted to be in Florida instead of other parts of the country. So we saw that lease up acceleration as a result of it. And, you know, we reopened in November. And what I can tell you is we've seen a lot of changes in terms of the types of passengers that we are seeing and the use cases that we are seeing. So, you know, to your point, people are using transportation differently. They're thinking about transportation differently. It's not, and this is going to be a challenge for anybody who's in the transportation space who wishes to convince people to leave their cars behind. And it's really around the experience that you're going to provide them with. What we're seeing is there's a lot more leisure travel than before. A lot more people are, I guess, with the hybrid work week, where they're only needing to show up to the office a couple days a week, and their work hours are a little bit more flexible during the rest of the week. They're using that time to go to the doctor. They're using that time to go to, you know, get their education, visit friends, do an errand, get some groceries, go to a specialty store, go have an experience with their kids. So we're seeing a huge uptick in that kind of travel demand. Obviously, commuter and business levels are still below what they were pre-pandemic, but our overall ridership is up 30% as compared to pre-pandemic. So we're seeing a huge uptick in non-commuter, non-business oriented travel. And as we think about development around our stations, I think, look, that the trend of urbanization is going to continue. I think the U.S. is, I think it's something like 55% urbanized. It's going to continue. It's continuing to grow every year. We need to provide transportation ecosystems around those urbanized areas to facilitate this kind of travel. And it needs to be the right, to your earlier point, Jeremy, it needs to be the right product. Because if it smells bad and it doesn't feel safe, I'm not taking it. I'm not going on date night with my wife. I'm not putting my kids, to travel by themselves in a train or on a bus unless it feels safe, unless it's a good experience. There's friendly people. There's going to be security. It's easy to buy a ticket. And multimodal in particular. Like, I don't want to, have to give Johnny like a quarter for the bus, and then a bus ticket for the, then a ticket for the train, and $5 for the taxi, and have the Uber app. They got to be able to do all of this seamlessly, and in a digital environment. So I do think that post-COVID, the world of transportation is shifting significantly, and I think that it's going to be the more commodity-looking transportation modes that will struggle to recover the most. Those that are more experientially focused, and I'm not just saying this because I'm biased, I am biased, but I'm not saying it for that reason. If you're more focused on the actual passenger experience, or as we call it, the guest experience, if you're not focused on that, you're going to find that it's going to be a much steeper hill to climb to get back to post-COVID numbers.
Agreed.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Patrick, when you and I spoke about this, I mentioned that we're seeing very similar travel patterns in New York as well. This is not Florida specific. And we're also seeing just the time in the week for peaks being shifting as well. We're seeing not just more leisure, but also folks who are commuting. It's happening more midweek, more Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, right, and different times of the day. So how do you think about, reaching out to folks to encourage them to change their mode, or perhaps, just incorporate public transportation differently? So that is a perfect segue to our next question, and it's open to anyone because you were all chomping at the bit when I talked about it. I want to talk about communication and public engagement. So meaningful community engagement and public involvement can be challenging in this work, but clear messaging, branding, and communication are critical to complete successful transportation projects. While funding for effective marketing can be a challenge to secure, traditional media and social media still influence public opinions. Can you talk about how access to the media or restricted access has influenced the success or highlighted the challenges of your projects?
Yeah, let me start off again from the government side. Our money is federal. We have certain things that we can do as MPOs. One of the things we can't do is market, public relations. What we can do is educate and do outreach and get community input. So we've had to be creative in how we do that. One of the things that I'm very proud of working on with the Broward Mpo, about 8 years ago, we did some analysis and we figured out hardly anybody knows what an MPO is or does. They don't know where the money comes from to build transportation facilities. So we did a project called Speak Up Broward. And the idea was to educate the community in Broward about transportation, about your gas tax goes and pays for the roads and different types of investments. But it also set the stage for Broward voters to be aware of the funding needs to develop a world-class transportation and transit system. The education then was instrumental in getting a ballot initiative out that failed in 2016 but passed in 2018 that now provides 1 cent for transportation that the voters of Broward approved. And about half of that money is going for transit improvements, and our Broward County Transit is currently working on their plan for premium transit and how they want to invest that money. So again, we didn't go and market and say, look at us, but we did education and outreach. And currently I have Carol Henderson from our team who's also working on some of that outreach. We've developed, I mentioned that we do a 25-year vision, but we also have a long-range Vision 2100. What's Broward going to look like in the next 100 years? And so we're doing panels where we bring in experts to talk about different aspects of transit, transportation, resiliency, things of that sort, so that we're getting the mission of the organization out there. We're educating the public. We're hoping to raise the level of conversation so that people have much more intelligent conversations about land use and transportation and investments and transit and things of that sort.
I'll add on to James, since we have the same function as a metropolitan planning organization, where our role is really to provide information, to solicit input, and to collaborate and provide agencies a platform to share information on transportation projects. However, I do want to recognize my colleague Javier Bentoncourt, the Executive Director of CITT, who's here in the audience, who's partnering with me to actually conduct a transportation summit, because now we find ourselves in a situation where, in addition to a lot of these virtual workshops and outreach, such as the Taste of Transportation series that we launched in Miami-Dade County, we're actually now coming back to try to conduct our summits and get back on track to have more of those larger infrastructure funding discussions. So I want to recognize Javier for partnering with us. We'll be messaging that on social media. It's June 3rd here in Miami, Transportation Summit. And also Tawari on my staff here, because I think what we've done is, during the pandemic, we were challenged. How do we conduct outreach? How do we continue to facilitate information exchange and gathering with agencies? We launched a series called Taste of Transportation. It is a recognized best practice by the Florida Department of Transportation. We facilitated with 9 partner agencies to come on our platform and share their transportation projects, as well as provided the general public an opportunity to ask questions, provide inputs, give us their complaints, suggestions, and also get back to them with specific tangible results. So it was so successful during COVID that we're actually continuing on with this program, and our next Taste of Transportation is on next Tuesday, April 26th at 12 noon. If you want to join us, Miami-Dade TPO.org, and check us out and join our Taste of Transportation information exchange.
I would just say, in the context of, branding and communications, it's about how do you actually make this relevant to your target audience? How do you make what you're offering relevant to your target audience? Most people don't care about, there's a small audience that care about the projects you're working on, but again, how do you touch the people who you want to actually get to use your service? It's about, again, this ties into the experience conversation. It's about developing a brand around your offering and all of the different touch points of that brand, so that you're thinking about every aspect of the experience, and then in all of your communications, and again, most of that's happening on social media today. How are you communicating that brand? How are you educating people on what you offer in a way that is relevant to them? How are you finding those people online and getting in front of them and showing them how they can use your service? Again, that's the sort of battle that we've had for the last few years is, I know there's a train, but why should I care? I know you have a train. I know there's a train that goes somewhere, travels through, whatever. But why do I care? How do I make this relevant for me? And so we actually have all kinds of content series that we develop around how to make it relevant for people. So, again, we have this program called Reasons to Ride, which is all about, depending on where you are, if I live in Miami, if I live in Palm Beach, if I live in Fort Lauderdale, what would the reasons be for me to ride the train? And I think that we all need to be thinking about how we make multimodal, car-optional travel relevant to our target consumers. And I think doing that through branding and storytelling is an important thing. And then one other aspect of this question you asked was on the community and how we think about the community in the context of Brightline is, from an infrastructure asset perspective, we like to think that this is the state's asset. This is not, this belongs to the state. This is an asset for the state to promote the vibrancy of this economy and the ability for people to live in West Palm and work in Miami and all those kinds of things. And, we're parts of all kinds of pitch decks, for whether it's different companies coming down looking to set up their HQ down in South Florida. We've promoted ourselves as their asset. But more importantly, how do we bring the community into our stations and trains through fashion, through art, through sports, through entertainment, through food and beverage, through culture, and bringing in art galleries, bringing in the lyric theater to display in our premium lounge, bringing in local musicians, partnering with the Miami Heat, partnering with Inter Miami, partnering with the hockey teams, the baseball teams, etc. All of that is a way to bring the community into the trains, into the stations, and to make the community feel like they own this asset. They own this form of transportation, that it's theirs. So I think that's an important thing for us all to consider. Community ownership leads to community participation.
And I'll just end by saying, ditto, I'm a huge fan of Bright Lines marketing, and I think we in government can learn a lot from it. I would just say we in the transit space, we have accustomed to knowing that we're not going to get anything done unless we have a champion. And we need that champion also when it comes to communication. We need that champion to be talking to the FDOTs, to the FTAs, to the federal highways to say we need help in speaking to the public. Right? We've gotten too comfortable with preaching to the choir. I'm tired of speaking in front of friendly audiences with everybody's nodding their head the entire time I'm talking, because we're all in the same, and then we all jump onto a single occupant vehicle and go home and say, what a great speech Jeremy made. No, we need to be talking to people who don't care about our cause, but we demonstrate the value in multimodalism and, again, make our products that they can find value in and will be attractive to them.
So along that line, this is something that we've learned over the last few years, and it ties into what Aileen was saying about your transportation, what is it called again? The events on April?
Taste of Transportation.
Taste of Transportation. One of the things that's great about that is, sometimes you have a meeting. We're going to talk about the intersection of First and Main here, and people will come and talk about that. But what we found is it's more effective if we piggyback on a neighborhood meeting where there's a bunch of people talking about a variety of things. So I think the Taste of Transportation, I got the email and I wanted to go to that. It looks interesting because there's a variety of things, and there's a value not only in talking about the ecosystem, as Patrick was talking about, that there's a variety of things, and it's not just the intersection, but it's part of how it fits in the overall system. You also get more people that are giving a variety of perspectives. They may not yell at you, Jeremy, but at least you get people that this voice says something and this one that, oh, I never thought of that. And you have that community that's hearing about things and seeing things. I think that's one of the flaws sometimes with public meetings and discussions. It becomes sometimes, are you for or against? Well, we're kind of for a better world. We're kind of for an ecosystem. Maybe we can tweak and adjust this aspect of it, but it's part of how it all fits together. And so that's why you'll see me on the list for your next meeting.
We'd love to have you.
Great, thank you all. So I want to pause for a second because this has been an incredible conversation, but you all have been listening so intently. I wanted to offer the opportunity for you all to ask any questions based on today's conversation so far. So please step to the mic if you have any questions.
Yes, I do. Hi, my name is Alex Behar. I'm actually European. I just moved to Florida a couple of weeks ago.
Welcome.
Thank you. I lived in New York in my upbringing as a child, and I spent the last 10 years in Europe and around Asia in the bigger and larger metro areas. Let me start with thanking Tiffany for moderating this awesome panel. And I also wanted to sort of relate to what Patrick said. I think train is, of course, the most cleanest, I guess, way of transportation. And one thing that I'm kind of certain will happen here in Miami is similar to Tokyo, where the property prices are measured on how long of a walk do you have from the train station. And every minute you're closer to the train station, the property price is 10% higher. So at some point, your efforts will surely be reflected in the property prices. But my question is towards Aileen. So yeah, we speak a lot, and as a tech entrepreneur, I can say we speak a lot about reducing friction in places, but sometimes the solution is actually to create friction. And so a bunch of European cities have announced banning ICE cars or on certain days or at certain locations. How likely, and maybe it's an open question to the rest of the panel as well, how likely do you guys think this is for a US, let's say Miami context, to actually create friction around the wrong behavior?
So I think some of the responses you heard earlier today would probably bring you to a conclusion that there are several ways to approach encouraging a modal shift or a behavioral shift in your network use. But if you can find a way to incentivize that as opposed to enclose, enforce, and eliminate options, we, in my organization and in our region, we have found that we've had some degree of success. And especially when you hear that from our private sector partners, our partners that are the ones that are really providing this service, leading with cutting edge technology and investing their dollars in private sector to introduce transportation. When you hear that perspective from our private sector partners that say, if you're going to force people, if your marketing approach, if your strategy is by force and elimination of options, good luck. If the private sector knows that, I think government is listening very closely. And Brightline is an amazing partner to us. And because of Brightline's success, our own public sector program, the Miami-Dade County Smart Plan, which is now transitioning to the program and implementation phase, now the SMART program, the Strategic Miami Area Rapid Transit Program, because of the success of our private sector, because of the success of South Florida Commuter Services, Miami-Dade County has also reaped rewards because we work to connect the network. And really what we're doing, our job is to expand mobility choices, not eliminate them. Our job is to look at the network and understand that it's not in balanced form. We did great for decades with highway roadways, but we have 25 miles of metro rail for 3 million people. We're not quite Tokyo yet, but we're one day maybe we will be by population density intensity that will get us to that model. So by increasing choices, by providing car optional, not car required, by making it convenient, by transitioning from transit-oriented development to transit-oriented communities and addressing communities, that's currently our track. So I would tend to not want to follow the model that you suggested just yet, and kind of follow our private sector, market, enterprise, US models that we have in place.
Thank you.
I want to slightly adjust my perspective on that, slightly. And this may be more of a, so whereas I think from a messaging perspective, you cannot beat people over the head with the ESG message because they are resistant to that. I do, however, think that Miami, of anywhere else in the United States, because of the current threat with sea rise, has been very widely covered, probably has a golden opportunity to take a much more aggressive tack from an ESG perspective in terms of their policies. So I think they have more of a license to be a bit more aggressive about how they start to implement measures that will positively impact the environment. So how you ease into that, sorry, there's a bit of feedback. How you ease into that is really up to, the county administrators, to the legislation. How you ease into that is sort of somewhat subjective, and it should be done at an appropriate pace. We don't want to start sort of implementing, draconian measures overnight. But I do think that Miami, of all places in the United States, has a fairly golden opportunity to start looking at those types of measures and implementing them over time. And again, thinking about Miami, particularly downtown and the beach areas, and looking at that transportation ecosystem. And yes, if you are going to implement restrictions, provide viable solutions at the same time. So it's a timing thing. You got to have those solutions in place before you start, restricting vehicle access certain times of the day and things like that. I think those things can be done. I think there are things that should be done, but again, timing is critical. Implementation is critical. So I'm
Can I-
slightly adjusting my comment.
Great perspective, and thank you, because I think we always, as government, need to listen to our consumer, our number one consumer, the riders, the choice, and also converting choice riders. But also, I want to add one other comment. We are not a legacy metropolitan area in terms of a legacy transit system. We have 25 miles of metro rail in our system, so the ratio of 3 million residents plus tourists on a daily basis and 25 miles, it's not a ratio you find often in metropolitan areas. So because we're not invested in legacy systems, we have the opportunity to introduce a lot of innovative technology-based solutions here that can further a model that incentivizes alternative choice and alternative use. Brightline, for example, is doing that first last mile on-demand technology-based platform. It's introducing something new to us, so I think we have a lot more choices to be able to offer to people that we can consider, because we're not tied or married to a legacy system and have to find ways to bring people only to one solution.
And if I can add to that by putting James on the spot, because I'm going to ask you to comment on it, but there was a light rail project that was slated for Fort Lauderdale, a little north of here to the outer towners. That was about 25 years in the making, a model on getting agencies to work together, fully funded, and it was killed at the last minute by the public. So I'm going to ask the gentleman from the MPO to share his thoughts on that, which I think will also speak to your question.
You know, I was thinking about how to bring not only the community, but the elected officials in there, because I think one of the questions that we deal with, Aileen can vouch for this, is, yeah, there is a desire to look at different ways of move people around. And I do want to highlight that Brightline is an attractive option because we have congested roadways. You have that choice of, do I take a nice, comfortable half-hour ride to Fort Lauderdale or sit white-knuckled driving possibly an hour, or, you know, so the congestion makes it more attractive. We in Broward are looking at places where we can reallocate lanes to create bicycle facilities, to provide more space for pedestrians, things of that sort. Sometimes we get the technical support that works. Sometimes the elected officials say, no, we want to make sure that people move, you know, so because they get the phone calls, they get the response from that. Coming back then to what Jeremy mentioned about Fort Lauderdale, we had this project that was going to be going forward, and some community antagonism started coming up that then spiraled and spiraled, tied to a mayoral election that some of the candidates were for a project, some were against. Again, not taking into account the whole ecosystem, focusing on dividing people. And the anti-streetcar elected officials won. And so when some of the cost estimates came in high, it gave the elected officials the opportunity to respond to the community and say, let's not do this system. One of the consequences has been we had a lot of investment. It was a proposed $150 million streetcar system. It spurred $1 to $2 billion with a B dollars of private investment around downtown Fort Lauderdale. We had a lot of projects came in with lower parking ratios, with higher density, with mixed uses, things of that sort. And so we have a built community, and our private communities are responding to the desires for diversity and options and different ways to move around. Our public side has not responded as well. Shortly after that failed, though, I think Brightline opened service. And I remember, you know, one of the complaints about the streetcar that the community was saying is, streetcars, that's old technologies, we need something new. And Brightline opened up, and I was at a public meeting, and I said, yeah, you know, the most exciting thing right now is Brightline, which is a train, which is old technology. Now they're doing it better. It's, you know, new approaches. But so there's a variety of different factors. From a technical perspective, yes, some of those things that you're saying are interesting and could be productive. And I think I may switch places with you and move off to Europe now that you're here. But we do have to respond to our local electeds and ratchet things up little by little. So.
Great. Thank you. That was a great question. I actually want to add, because I'm from New York and we're doing congestion pricing. So we are probably doing it the more forceful way, and I'm glad, James, that you actually brought up the point that I wanted to make as well, which is political will. Sometimes political will and timing more than anything, because in New York, at least, congestion pricing has been an idea around for at least 10 to 15 years and has gone for a state vote at least 3 times or 2 times before it was officially passed a few years ago. So sometimes it's just timing, it's political will, but it's all of these things. So we are actually at time for today, and I just wanted to take the time to thank all of my amazing panelists. I really appreciate you sharing your expertise and your time with us as well, and taking audience questions, and thanks to everyone in the audience who stayed and was really engaged, and I hope that you learned a ton this afternoon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.